lived in America since she was 2 years old, she insisted on calling Mrs. Oakenfeld Mum instead of Mom. In fact, all the children called Mrs. Oakenfeld Mum, but only Susan said it with an English accent, a habit for which Charles teased her constantly. "I say, Mum," Susan said again, ignoring her younger brother, who, as usual, had his nose buried in some boring-looking science magazine. "The Bay of Eternity is a queer name for a place. It sounds positively Victorian." "Don't say Victorian." Charles drew out the second syllable somewhat longer than his sister had, then turned a page in his magazine, which in fact wasn't a magazine at all, but a catalog that offered replacement parts for old radios. The previous summer, Charles had developed a passion for what he called antiquated technology, and the bedroom he shared with Murray was overrun with half-assembled, or more accurately half-disassembled, radios and telephones, and one ancient television, whose console was nearly as big as his dresser, even though the screen was smaller than the one on his father's laptop. "It's affected," Charles added, and flipped another page. "It does sound a bit quaint," Mrs. Oakenfeld said, though Susan was sure she'd been going to say queer. "But I think perhaps you shouldn't mention it to Uncle Farley. He might not see it that way." Susan stuck out the side of her cheek with her tongue, as she often did when she was considering her options. She had pale, thin cheeks and very short, dark hair, so the lump her tongue made was quite pronounced. "Does Uncle Farley have a telly?" she said finally. "I believe they have television in Canada," Mrs. Oakenfeld said. "I meant, does he have cable?" Now Mrs. Oakenfeld understood. In addition to reading copious amounts of English literature, which is where she'd picked up somewhat affected words such as queer and Victorian, her eldest child habitually tuned in to BBC World to keep her accent in top polish. She was especially fond of the news, and had been frustrated by not being allowed to watch it in recent days. "I'll make you a deal," Mrs. Oakenfeld said. "If you go up to Uncle Farley's without any fuss, I'll see that you're provided with all the quality British programming you can watch." A siren sounded in the street below the Oakenfelds' apartment, and the conversation lulled. Susan's cheek bulged as though she were sucking on a golf ball. Part of her was contemplating a move to a house she'd never seen, inhabited by an uncle she'd never met. And part of her was contemplating just what exactly the siren in the street might indicate. It was a boggling proposition, and more than a little frightening, and only the strained expression on Mrs. Oakenfeld's face kept Susan from giving her mother the third degree. Although Susan claimed to have been waiting to start debating for 3 years, it was generally agreed in the Oakenfeld household that she had been very actively waiting, frequently annoying her parents and Charles with her cross-examinations. "I suppose it will have to do," she said eventually, and she shook her mother's hand to seal the deal. Charles turned a page noisily, but didn't say anything. As the well-behaved middle child, he was all too used to no one asking what he wanted. Chapter 2. Uncle Farley. "He will be an old man," Susan announced, when at last the car turned left and Mrs. Oakenfeld said that this was the road her brother lived on. "He will have no hair, except what grows out of his ears and nostrils, and he will wear spectacles and a brown cardigan with toast crumbs and sauce stains on it, even to bed, and he will be a Luddite." Murray looked horrified. He was just beginning to understand there was no solar mum awaiting them at Uncle Farley's, and now he threw his arms around his mother's neck and said, "What's that?" "A Luddite," said Charles, not bothering to look up from his book, "is someone who dislikes technology." "Oh."